Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everyone, to the highlight of your Thursday. My name is Devanshi Mathur, and I will be your MC this evening. I know we let everyone in about a minute early, so while we have our last few trickle in, I've got a joke for you, and this is the best joke I've heard all week. So I'm very excited to share it with you, and I hope you all laugh a lot. What do you call a sleepy T-Rex? A dinosaur. It's a great joke. Thank you all for laughing. I promise you the rest of our show today is going to be much better than my opening lines. But before I hand over the reins to our speaker for this evening, I invite you to please use the chat box throughout the entire webinar to ask any questions that you might have for our speaker so that I can kind of feed them to her during our Q&A at the end of our session today. All attendees will receive a copy of the slide deck, a recording, and instructions on how to get your CPE hours certificate in your email. For all of those you who haven't had the chance to meet our local education superstar, please let me introduce to you Paula Noe. She is an experienced consultant who works with educational tech companies, regional service centers, districts, and campuses with user interface, user experience, instructional coaching, and innovative professional development. During her 21 years plus in education, she has served as the Director's Associate Superintendent's Office as an instructional leader, tasked with improving teacher and administrator effectiveness. She has also served as a curriculum writer and professional development presenter. She is the coolest cat on the block. Please give your warmest welcome to Paula Noe.
Wow, Devanshi, and my work is done. I'm out. What a great introduction. I'm very humbled by that. So thank you so much. So I will summarize that beautiful introduction to really just say, hopefully I'm a helper. Hopefully, I help teachers make it better by giving you some tools and support as you sharpen your craft, as you connect with kids. So that's ultimately my goal for any sort of engagement I have with anybody in the field of education. I have the utmost respect for all of my colleagues in this field, and am very humbled by all the fantastic, hard work and great things that you're doing for our kids and our community, and then with a special emphasis on science. So let's get started. Blended learning. What in the world is that? Let's talk about it. So blended learning, you may be a little familiar with it, you may be not. No worries, we're gonna go over some definitions and some explanations of what it can be and what it can look like, but just know that there are many definitions out there, and I think they're all pretty functional, but this is the one we're going to go with for the training. What is blended learning? Well, I think it's an incorporation of face-to-face and online learning with a goal. Right? There needs to be a goal if we're doing things with kids, and that's to help enrich the classroom experience and to make sure that we're extending the learning. And so I think that the reason that you would choose blended learning is that it provides a lift for you and for your students to get better connected. So why would I do blended learning? Well, I think it's an opportunity for you to create personalized learning environments for all your kids. I think it's also an environment where more opportunities for formative assessment and feedback come into play. It definitely supplements the students' learning with more resources that you can access. So it's much more diverse other than pen and paper or book and paper or just strictly video. And it also creates opportunities for targeted instruction, group collaboration, and individualized instruction. So what do I really mean by all that? Well, I think a couple of takeaways that I'm pretty sure that you learned in COVID learning, as the districts that I've worked with have, And that was this, is that we were not very agile. Going from strict face-to-face to completely flipping overnight almost to online learning, we lost a lot of engagement opportunities because of obstacles. And so some of those obstacles were on us as a system, right, as a school system. And some of the obstacles were created by teachers because we weren't quite up to speed at teaching in multiple formats. And then the bulk of the obstacles came on the students' end with a varying amount of different kinds of technology and getting up to speed in an online environment, along with just the other challenges. And so I think that what we have seen across the world is people embracing blended learning to stay agile. And so if you're not quite open yet to engaging in a form of blended learning or engaging in multiple forms of blended learning, I completely understand that, but I would strongly encourage you just to remain open to the idea of how remaining agile and remaining personalized can actually accelerate and accentuate what's going on with you and the kids inside the classroom. So moving on, we're going to talk about the different models, and then I'm going to give some examples of what a day could look like or what a lesson could look like. And then I'll give more examples towards the end of how I think EduSmart fits in to this model of blended learning and provides that fantastic lift that I think all teachers are looking for. But for a second, I'm going to pause. And Devanshi, how are we doing on the chat?
Doing good.
Okay, here we go. So first steps first, right? You need to pick a model that fits. And when we say a model that fits, what I really mean is that it fits you and that it fits your kids, because it needs to fit both in order for the work to move. So how can you leverage your lessons or blueprints or instructional resources without minimizing the content that you need to create or deliver? And then also, how do you have a good balance between online and offline experiences? What I have noticed across the country is people have swung completely back from online during COVID days to completely face-to-face without any online considerations. And so I think that a blended model really would encourage people to embrace keeping students up to date and agile and sharp with being able to perform your science lessons in an engaging way to give you formative assessment data, even though they're not face-to-face. So that would be the challenge. And then also many other challenges are involving technology. What audio or video technology are you going to have access to? And then how will you use it? And then how do you set up your physical space to ensure that all students have a positive learning experience? And then one point that I did leave off of there is I think that you need to strongly consider that when you're in an online format, that you need to make sure that all the accommodations are present for your children, because that federal guideline does not change regardless of what setting we're in. So first step first, you need to pick a model that fits you and the specific piece of learning you're wanting to take place. Next, step 2, think through the tech and test the tech. So it's one thing just to think through it, and it's another thing to actually test it and have the students engage with it so it's seamless engagement. So having that release of responsibility from you driving the technology in the classroom to actually the kids being able to maneuver it without you and give you those input points from instruction. So what model makes sense for the resources that you have access to? And then which model aligns with your comfort level? And so that's another thing, is that just because it's available doesn't mean that that is where you are as the instructor. And if you're not comfortable with it, the kids are going to struggle with it, and then you're going to struggle with the kids that are struggling with it. So I think the goal would be to remove those obstacles and to slowly incorporate things as you gain comfort and confidence. And that would impart comfort and confidence inside of your teaching as well. And then how might you pull ideas from multiple models to meet your needs once you get one model underneath your belt, perhaps? And then how will your needs change over time? And then what parts of your class can be asynchronous, and then what part of your class can be synchronous, and then getting into a flow with that. So we'll move on. So step 3, always, always, always. Elementary teachers are fantastically strong at this, establishing routines and structures, making sure that you have routines in place that really help your learners develop a consistency and ease with transitioning quickly between asynchronous or whole group or face-to-face instruction, and then releasing that learning into a learning station that can be independent, or it could be online or offline, but developing the transition quickly so instructional time is not lost. And then also in step 3 with routines and structures, are there any systems in place that support student self-monitoring? So we know from the past, and we definitely know from COVID, that we released a lot of the learning during asynchronous time in COVID. But the problem is that we didn't build up or partner with the students to build up an accountability system where they could start self-monitoring and self-regulating. So I think that that's huge. It can take place as young as kindergarten with the right expectations that are grade level appropriate. But I do think that you need to spend some time considering what those may be. Then also, what materials will each student need to have access to in each setting? What support does each student need in each setting, and what structures will be put in place? For instance, if they have a question and they're in an online station or in a blended station, what is the procedure for getting help inside of that station? And then how are you going to gather multiple forms of feedback as the blended learning lesson progresses? And so I think that that's the golden ticket right there, is that it's not just a sit and get. It's not check out and just be asynchronous and watch a video. It is engaging with whatever medium we put inside of the blended learning, and having the students give us back information, because that's the part of the relationship that we want to continue to maintain and commit to, is that it's the release of the responsibility from the teacher to the student, but it is a loop. And so we teach and instruct, and then they give us feedback as they learn, and then we modify our teaching instruction and then continue to get more feedback in a formative way. And then how might you incorporate structures to differentiate for your diverse learners? So how does that tricky piece of differentiation inside the learning happen that can be very personalized? So Devanshi, how are we doing? Going to check in.
You're doing great, Paula.
Okay, so let's move forward. And then I'm going to open up the chat just to have some people respond to this. Before we launch into the breakdown of a lesson, this would be an example of a lesson. Give me some questions that you have at this moment on what I've talked about so far about blended learning and the models, or you can also turn on your mic and just banter with me real quick if you have a wondering or an aha or something you would like to share.
Nothing in the chat so far.
All right, well, I'm going to leave that chat open for you in case y'all have any questions. or any wonderings that you would like to share. And let's go straight into what does a lesson look like? And I say a lesson, I'm meaning one moment in time. For instance, we'll just talk about a 60-minute class period, because I know that word lesson can mean different things to different people on different campuses. So inside of a 60-minute lesson, this could be a breakdown for you. I would always recommend that you start with a launch. Generally speaking, for me, I highly encourage people to use visual literacy. Another word for a launch could be a hook. And so I presented a hook to you right now, this visual image over here of oranges on a tree that happen to be frozen. That would be the piece of visual literacy. So let's break this down just quickly. So in the chat, or some courageous soul, turn on your mic, and I would love to banter with you about this particular piece of visual literacy. Ryan, are you there?
Yes, so I see frozen lemon tree.
Yes, you see a frozen orange tree. So, hey, so why do you think it's frozen?
Due to the
weather condition.
Ah, very good. Look at that teammate.
frozen water on the oranges.
It's like the Family Feud here. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little more background on this image. So Ryan and the helper that gave him the clue there. So this could also be an example of the water cycle impacting a plant, correct? But I'm going to tell you a little bit about this image. So this is actually an image from Florida, and this is something that Floridian farmers do to their orange crop. Now, why would a farmer spray down the orange trees? Why would they do that?
To protect the crop.
So you're a high-level learner. That's a very high-level response. That's right. So tell me about that, Ryan. Tell me.
Instead of letting it freeze on its own, you spray water on it so it actually insulates the crop, so it doesn't freeze and damage the fruit.
Very good, because nobody likes to buy mushy oranges or mushy lemons on the inside. So Ryan is exactly right. So the farmer sprays down the crop to allow the freezing to take place from a liquid to a solid, right? And so it insulates the inside, causing the cells not to rupture. So that will help preserve the fruit. So the reason that I put this picture up is because this engages students in wonderings and thoughts, and you can completely align it to your standards. But it's a very cheap, effective way that didn't cost me a lot of time, but I get a whole lot of bang for my buck out of it. This also happens to be a huge selling point for EduSmart. EduSmart is super visual. It's filled with these just right visuals of science happening in front of students and on the screen, of lab demonstrations, lab particles reducing in size as they dissolve. And those are things that kids need in order to bridge gaps, especially if they have background knowledge gaps. So it makes science come alive, and it also aids the teacher in creating a lift conceptually as I teach and share my information, especially on First Teach. If I have EduSmart going in the background, and then I pause and ask very rigorous questions about the just right image. So this would be an example of a visual literacy piece or a hook or a launch. After this, we would go into the core lesson, which I call the work. And this is where you would do your short mini lessons, and you would introduce stations, or you would just do a straight up mini lesson if that's what it called for. But this would be the place where you would have a short lesson in stations in the blended learning model, or you would launch into stations if that's where you were inside of your learning cycle. And then always, every day, we close the lesson down and make connections back from the 3D learning that we've had back to a 2D question, making sure the information translates for us. So Ryan, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Let's move on to what some of the blended learning stations can look like. So first, let's talk about the station rotation model. The station rotation model is probably one of the most popular models that teachers pick up. And I noticed that inside of the blended learning stations, most teachers like to use this towards the end of the learning cycle. So if a learning cycle is first teach, reinforce the concepts, maybe day 3 would be that really important lab investigation. Day 4 might be a great day for stations, with the teacher being one of the stations, in order to pull a guided science group over to do that concept refinement and making sure that the 3D to 2D has connected with those scholars. And then also a couple of more stations, perhaps inside of a 60-minute rotation, where students are refining their knowledge before a short summative assessment on Friday. My favorite way to do blended learning is this way. It is also my favorite way to see the teacher in action by being available to her students in guided science. It's not necessary that the teacher is involved. You can use stations however you want. This would be my recommendation though. Anytime you decide to incorporate any part of blended learning, is that you practice with one and you get good with one type of blended learning, and then you try to get good at another type of blended learning, and then maybe incorporate both of those inside of a week. And then once you get your systems and your rhythm down, perhaps you look at picking up another type of blended learning. So next, let's go to the individual rotation model. This would be a model where the student would have some choice and voice in it, or perhaps it could be a data responsive rotation module. And so if they cleared a particular station, let's say if they were doing EduSmart and they did a student review and they got a certain formative score, then they might move to a Quizlet station, or they might move to a make and take station or a maker station. And so it would be based on when the work is completed by the student, and then probably giving the student a choice on which way they would like to learn something, whether it's online or offline or a combination of both. Next, there is the flipped learning model. And that is where I, as the teacher, am doing whole group teaching, and then part of my class is doing the asynchronous version. And then we flip at some point inside the lesson cycle that day, or maybe we alternate the days. And so EduSmart would be prime for this particular type of learning, that you could front load first teach by having students work through the instructional module, which are these short little 2 to 3 minute vignette clips of science being processed through the standard that are very, very visual. It stops and asks them a question. And then it also comes with an instructional companion, which is a closed document that is also in Google Doc form, where the students can drag and drop to make sure that we have refined our learning. It's also accompanied with some journal prompts and a visual organizer. So super, super important that the students do all 3 of these things in order to cement the learning before they would come into the first teach with the instructor. And so you can do it one way or the other. You can let EduSmart come in behind you and close out the first teach with this visually rich presentation, or you can front load it and have EduSmart do the lifting. I've seen it done well both ways. And it's one way to use the product to create smaller classroom sizes for you as the instructor to make better connections with your kiddos and create more space for their voice. And then lastly, whole group rotation model. This simply means that as a group, we rotate through the stations. So the stations are built much like station rotation model, but we move as a group all together. That's one way to do the same type of learning, but with incorporating 2 different models. I'm a fan of that when you're speaking about getting used to all the different blended learning stations. That's a great way to build capacity for your students to get exposure to the different types of blended learning. So Devanshi, how are we doing?
We're doing great. We do have some questions and comments in the chat. Do you want to take them now or wait till the end?
Now is great. I'll take a few now and we'll save a few for later.
Perfect. So we had Fergus, right, we started a blended learning style this year using stations and has been quite difficult due to large class sizes and 7th ELA.
Okay.
So I'm assuming it's coming from, yeah, do you have any comments on that, Paula?
I always have comments. So thank you for trying blended learning. Large class sizes are rather difficult, but I think blended learning is going to be your wheelhouse. My counsel to you would be to make sure that your expectations are really tightly written for the stations. And I would make sure that you're not trying to put too much into a station and rotate them too quickly. I think that the downside of a station rotation model or blended learning stations is that sometimes teachers try to pack so much in the stations that the kids feel rushed, and then it becomes a click and get, or I call it a slap and go. They slap some information down on a paper and leave the station, or they just sit and watch and they're not really engaged. And so I would make sure that I pick my stations really wisely and that there is always a student product that has to come out of the station, but perhaps maybe having 2 stations instead of 3 inside of a 60-minute block. And Play Pause It is actually excellent for that. EduSmart is excellent for that. I think it models a really good system of how to get formative assessment data from students as they are learning. So I think you have some fantastic examples. Hopefully you'll have a few more tools in your tool belt as you leave the training. But I would say stick with it. Not all concepts, not all weekly content lend itself to blended learning. And so that's the thing that I am encouraging all the teachers and administrators that I work with. I'm hard pressed to think that we do blended learning based on a recipe for every day, and then we take the content and just put it in. I think you have to really study and own your content and come to an agreement of what the success criteria needs to be for that content. What is that product that you need those kids to demonstrate for you in order to show mastery? And that if that aligns better to using blended learning, then that's when I would use blended learning. But I don't think it always aligns to blended learning, with the exception of the flipped classroom model. So if I had 30 students, I would strongly be also thinking about flipping the class and having half the class doing something for half the time while I had the other half of the class, the other 50% of the class with me, making the class smaller so I can engage and refine their skills. So Devanshi, can I have one more question?
I think our next question actually leads quite well into what you're going to talk about next. We had Anasita ask, I want to see how blended lessons are delivered.
All right, are you ready? Here it comes. This would be an example of a station rotation model that I would do with some kiddos. Okay, so station rotation model, they would be with me building this anchor. And this could be day one of the concept. And so I've probably showed them a quick little 30-second video launch, or we've engaged in some visual literacy already to hook them and to get them talking. And then I would release 2 groups, one group to go up here to the Word Explorer, which is a product of EduSmart. I'll go over in just a second. And then off to the right of your screen is the graphic organizer from the instructional module that they would watch at a station and that they would engage in. And remember me saying earlier that 99% of the time, I do not recommend students just sitting at a blended station asynchronously without having to produce a product, because I think engagement goes way down. When they know that there is an expectation of a product, engagement goes up, right? Okay, so let's talk about that. So this would be a teacher station, for a third of the kids. The other third of the kids would be at the Vocabulary Word Explorer, which is an interactive product on EduSmart. And then the other third of the kids would be watching an instructional module, which is a video clip or a student review, which engages them in some formative assessment questions. And then they would actually have to produce this product for me, which is also available on a Google Doc. So you can grab a URL link and put it into any sort of digital LMS or format. So building the anchor with me, very interactive. We're going to have the notes already provided for us, but I'm going to engage elementary kids into filling this out, not drawing the pictures. And so that would be the piece that I'm going to build their background knowledge on what in the world is energy and why is melts important to me? Mechanical, electrical, light, thermal, sound. We're going to practice using total body responses. I'm going to show examples. So I would do a normal first teach here for about 10 minutes. Then they would rotate over here to the Word Explorer, and I'm going to click on one. So now I'm inside of EduSmart. And these are
Select a flashcard to learn more about the science term. Once you complete the activity successfully, the flashcard will flip over and reveal the formal definition.
Okay, so Word Explorer is an interactive vocabulary game that is very, very visual. So you notice that visuals are the wheelhouse of EduSmart. So look at how the learning comes alive here. I'm just going to click on electrical energy for the card. So listen up. So it already
Visual
gave us
examples. One or more images are examples of the term. Select your answers. Select Submit to check your answers.
So I love this product because it also gives example instructions. You can enlarge the image. The examples are very relevant and colorful. And then you can go back to the Word Explorer and launch it again. But they are going to work through this vocabulary practice that's very, very visual and engaging and concept building in a very interactive way. And so let me go back to my presentation. So a third of the group is doing that, while a third of the group would be watching the instructional module and then filling in the graphic organizer. So that would be an example of Paula Noe doing a station rotation model for day one of energy. So here would be an example of what I would do in a classroom for a flipped learning model. So this would be a choice board that I created using EduSmart products, giving some kids some choice. And at the elementary level, probably early on conceptually, if we're talking about circuits, if we're talking about energy, and quite honestly, regardless of what we're talking about, I probably won't give complete choice, so I will give a guided choice. So I might say to my scholars, you must do one, choice number one, but then you can pick two more. You can pick any two. And knowing that it took not a whole lot of time on my part to build this, because I simply used the templates that's provided to you for free through EduSmart, that I also linked the EduSmart lesson right here inside of choice number one. And so I shared this on the learning platform. So the kids, because they're in on the particular learning platform that you run, they don't have to log in. They're just simply have to click the tab, and then it's active inside their account. So I'm tracking their clicks, I'm tracking their time on task, and I'm also tracking and getting some formative assessment data as well. But this would be a longer station, especially because we're doing 3 clicks. And so what I would do here in this flipped learning model is I really, really, really am a firm believer of making the lab investigation and the lab experience small. For this reason, kids will talk if there is space. If there is space, And if there is time, kids will talk. And the inverse is true. Kids absolutely will not talk if they are rushed and there is no space and time. If the goal is to hurry up and get done with the lab, they will do that really well. That's not the goal. The goal of any lab would be to actually present the exploration or the investigation to the students and have them follow the steps, doing the just right steps of thinking as they process information, whether that thinking is exploring, testing, measuring, identifying, whatever the task may be inside of the exploration or investigation. Maybe it's an inquiry. In order for that to work, you're going to need some space. And by creating space, you're going to also create airspace and sound space for kids to stop and ask questions, and for concept refinement. So that great dialogue between a teacher and a student to scaffold up the rigor of the learning experience. And so in a classroom that I would like to see this flipped learning model, the teacher would have 2 lab setups. So one lab setup ready to go for half the class, while the other half of the class did the circuit choice board. Then we would flip it, and they would do the inverse. And then I would close the lesson down. So let's go on to the whole group rotation model. So the whole group rotation model, this means we all rotate together, right? But we're rotating to a variety of stations. And so I have 3 stations here to rotate through and to. The first one is I'm really going to try to seal the deal with the just right lab investigation. So because I know I've chosen a blended learning station model for today, my lab is going to be probably a teacher demo that's mostly done with some high-level questions for my students. So this might be a station, if we're talking about mixtures, 2 or more things added that can easily be separated, or if we're talking about solutions with 2 or more things added where one of those things dissolves. So I go back to the piece of the learning. There's more fruit hanging on the tree if you create space to ask the just right questions to process the information. So if I did a teacher demo for the lab piece, and that was 10 minutes, 12 minutes, I would pull out this particular image out of EduSmart. And this particular image is actually inside the simulation at the bottom. And so this is a simulation that happens inside of EduSmart. There are activities, there are simulations, there are lab investigations. This is where the students are actually doing the lab online, and they can't mess it up. And if they get stuck and they don't do something right, they get prompted to go in and correct it or to fix it in order to move forward. So it is a fantastic guided way in order to get to those high levels of thinking and processing and still get them the lab skills that they need, but in an online situation, but guaranteed that I have high level results. And this is what I mean by this. I'm going to ask this question right here. Somebody turn on your mic and tell me what I'm looking at on the image on the top right. Who is a risk taker?
Say it's a matter.
So can I banter?
Liquid.
So let's banter. So what do you see there?
Solid and solvent. It's a solution.
Yeah.
It's a solid and a liquid.
Yeah. Okay. So talk to me about that. So what dots could be solids and what dots could be liquid? What colors do you see? So give me some more information. You're doing great.
So you have the blue, which is the solid, and the white, which is the liquid. And you put the solid and it will melt in the liquid. And so now you have the solution.
Okay. And what made you think that it was a solution? What was your key?
Because you won't see anymore the solid that's in there. It will completely melt.
Okay.
Dissolve.
Okay, yeah, it'll completely dissolve. So I think
Dissolve, yes.
going with
Well,
that.
a solution is when everything is mixed evenly, and that's what you see in the picture.
Okay,
Everything is distributed evenly all around the picture, because that's what a solution is. When the salt mixes evenly with the water, there's not one section has more than the other. It's an even mixture all the way through.
okay. So somebody that has not talked to me, answer this question. How many particles do you see on that diagram? How many different particles?
I think there are two different types of particles.
Okay, do you only see two colors?
I'm on my phone, so it's a little hard for me to see. I think I see two colors.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to cut it there, but I think you understand where I'm going with this. So there is a light blue background with dark blue dots and white dots spread evenly. So there's a lot of key vocabulary inside of that description. So why do I see three colors? That I have two substances that went into water. So it's representing water as the solvent, and the blue dots and the white dots would be the solute. Okay? And so key words in order to break down this picture, for it to be a solution, everything needs to be evenly dispersed. And that's what this dot diagram represents. So the reason I'm showing you this is the money reason why you should be a subscriber to EduSmart. When you did this lab investigation with your children and your students, did you show it to this detail? If you did, kudos, kudos, great job. Because this is 3D to 2D learning. This is what EduSmart does well, is it takes technology and it breaks it down for us conceptually so we can understand it better by magnification. This is not something that students can see probably just by dissolving lemon juice and sugar inside of water. If you're just holding up a glass, I'm hard pressed to think they're going to see this and represent it this way. But if they did, great. But if not, we don't take a chance on that. So EduSmart has thought it through and shows this kind of detail and attention inside of the lab investigations. So also you will notice in the lab simulation here at the bottom, they're using substances such as sugar, peppermint candy, pepper, iron filings, and chalk. They're using lab equipment, a stirring rod, a beaker. They've measured the volume of the water with 250 mils. They have left nothing to chance here, tying in physical properties of matter completely as it is tested out through the concept of mixtures and solutions. And quite honestly, that it's at the highest level of rigor that we see. So moving on, an individual rotation model, this would be an example of what I would put. I would use a pre-built assignment inside of EduSmart. And so you can assign to small groups, whole group, or just a group of kids based on their data or to be responsive instructions. So based on DDI or RTI, this is what you would queue up for each student based on their learning needs. It's very easy. It takes a matter of 5 seconds or less per student because the students populated in your queue. You simply add assignments to their queue and hit assign. And so when they come to their rotation model for EduSmart, they know that they have something already pre-built in the queue for them. So that would be an example of what I would use for the individual rotation. So Devanshi, you're back on right now. Hit me with some questions.
Okay, that was like perfect timing, Lisa. We've got about 10 minutes left for Q&A. So please, if you have any questions, feed them into our chat box and I will forward them to, or unmute, I will give them to Lisa, Paula. So Paula, we had one teacher write in which model for RTI plus DDI. I'm not sure what those abbreviations mean, but if you could explain that and answer that question, please.
Absolutely. So RTI is response to instruction. And DDI is data-driven instruction. And so DDI would be more of a whole group or a larger group of kids, and how I would impact my reteach in a larger setting. RTI would be very specific response to instruction for a student. And so that's how we interpret those acronyms. And they can be interchangeable. I think the goal, I wouldn't get caught up in the acronyms, but the goal would be this. Anytime we get data, data is good because it tells us the story. And as I tell kids all the time, it's not about whether or not we got it. It's about what our next steps are if we didn't get it, right? Because we're in a constant cycle of learning. And so I picture the teacher and the student like a loop, right? I taught it, I'm checking their learning. If they got it, we're going to cycle and we're going to keep moving on. If not, I'm going to cycle through and I'm going to be very responsive to them, because there's no point in moving forward if we did not get what we needed to get. And so I think you have to focus on the things that matter, and ensuring the student success piece is huge. So it's not about whether I taught it, it's about whether they got it. And then also, we know in science that we teach a very packed year-to-year season of TEKS, and it goes from August all the way right up into testing. And so we also know that there are certain points at the end of units, for instance, that is a perfect time for us to go back and spiral through. So that's another place that I would go back in and look at the data. EduSmart has some fantastic products called StarSmart. These are questions that are very rigorous. They're star aligned, and they have 10 questions per TEK. They have 20 questions per unit. And then I think they have 2 star released practice tests that do not contain the actual STAR test. They contain EduSmart questions. So I think that it's hugely important just to have something in your back pocket that's fresh questions and that you know are rigorous and aligned to the standards. And so you're constantly spiraling back in, and that you can see the data that your kids give you from these assessment questions would help you inform your next steps.
Thank you so much, Paula, for that. Thank you. Thank you. We have just a few more minutes left, so I am going to take a moment to steal the show. Yes. We have a lot of questions coming in that some of you have come to our session late or had to leave early. How can you get your questions or learn about the items that you kind of missed out on? Those are all great questions. We will be sending out a recording of Paula Noe's presentation today, as well as a copy of her slide deck with all of her links in there. That's all of the resources that she's been showing. It'll have all of that information in there, and you should be receiving that early next week with all of that in there, as well as if you have any additional questions, how to contact us, both about the topics that Paula has presented on, and if you have questions about our EduSmart product, we can get you in touch with our EduSmart experts. We only have a minute left. So as you can see, thank you, Paula, for pulling up that slide. Our whole team is here to support you. We have your back. So please write down our number, write down our email, and get in touch with us. If not, you can always email us at info@edusmart.com. That's the best way to reach us. We will make sure to get hold of you. We do have some more questions for you, Paula, but I'm sorry we won't be able to get to them today. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know you had a full day of work today, and coming after a full day of work to join us, I recognize all the effort that goes into there, and we hope that this session has been useful to you. Thank you for coming. And most of all, Paula, thank you so much for presenting with us today. A huge round of applause for you. All the applauses. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're quite welcome. I love to be in front of teachers and just to help be a part of their story. So thank you guys for what you do for your kids, for your schools, your communities, and for everyone. So I really appreciate you. I hope this helps. I hope it's answered some of your questions. So take a minute and just figure out how you can continue to sharpen your practice and keep working hard with those kiddos and good things happen. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Have a good one, everyone.
Wait, so we get an email saying that we get credit for being here?
Yes, so everyone on early next week, most probably Monday, will be receiving an email in which it will lay out the instructions on if you want your CPE hour certificate, how to get that. And it's basically just responding to that email with how you want your name printed. And I will be the one who will be creating your certificates and getting those to you.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. Any other questions I can answer? Okay, have a great Thursday, everybody. Please tell everyone you meet my dinosaur joke. It's a great joke. It's 10 out of 10, a great icebreaker. Your students are gonna love it. You'll be their favorite teacher. Okay, have a good one, everyone. Bye.